Aliens experimented on a human baby, then the dragons arrived to save him. The spaceship hovered high above the planet's surface, its cold metallic walls reflecting the distant stars. Inside, the atmosphere was sterile and silent. A dim light flickered above a small, clear pod placed carefully in the center of the room. Inside the pod, a tiny human baby lay motionless, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The aliens, with their elongated limbs and piercing eyes, stood around the pod, observing the baby with a sense of detachment. To them, he was nothing more than an experiment, a mere subject for their twisted scientific curiosity. They had gathered DNA from various species across the galaxy, and the human child was just another part of their plan. A test. An instrument. Failed, one of the aliens muttered, his voice cold and emotionless. He tapped something on a glowing control panel, causing the pod's lights to dim. The baby stirred for a moment, but no one seemed to care. For the aliens, this was business. A failed experiment meant nothing. They had no attachment to this fragile human child. It was just another failure to discard. A thick silence filled the room as they made their decision. "Dispose of it," the leader said, his voice echoing in the empty chamber. It was not a command. It was a dismissal, as if the life of a human child meant nothing in the grand scheme of their plans. Without a second thought, the aliens closed the pod and began to prepare for the child's disposal. The spaceship hummed as it shifted into position. It was time to leave. The baby, abandoned and forgotten, would be left on a barren, desolate world, a place where no life existed, except for a few forgotten secrets buried beneath its surface. The spaceship descended slowly, its thrusters cutting through the atmosphere. Below, the dark and rocky surface of the planet seemed endless, stretching far and wide in every direction. A wasteland. With a cold mechanical hiss, the door to the pod opened, and the baby was released into the harsh environment. The aliens didn't even look back as they flew off, disappearing into the sky, leaving the child behind. It was a cruel fate. The baby's cries echoed into the empty air, but no one heard, no one cared. The aliens believed that the human child wouldn't survive. To them, it was as if the baby had never mattered in the first place. But something strange was happening. As the baby's cries faded into the distance, a dark shadow shifted in the sky above. High above the planet, far beyond the reach of the alien ship, something watched. Something ancient. There was a stirring in the heavens, a distant rumble that came from far within the mountains. It was as though the very land itself was waking up, reacting to the child's presence. The baby, lying on the cold ground, continued to cry, his small body racked with tiny shivers. But no one had come for him. Not the aliens. Not the cold, uncaring world. Only the wind and the distant, silent stars. But then, the ground beneath him began to tremble. A low, powerful sound rumbled through the earth. The baby stopped crying, sensing something. Something different. Something alive. A large shadow stretched across the barren landscape. At first it looked like a cloud, but then it grew larger. The wind picked up, swirling around the baby, and for a moment, it seemed like the sky was bending in on itself. And then, with a deafening roar, the earth cracked open, and from the depths of the planet's core, massive winged creatures emerged. The dragons were here. Their scales shimmered with an otherworldly glow, their bodies huge, dark, and powerful. The leader of these dragons, taller than any creature the human child had ever seen, looked down upon the small form of the abandoned baby. The baby, now silent, stared up at the great beasts, his tiny body frozen in awe. The dragons circled, the baby, their eyes glowing with an ancient power that could not be understood by mere mortals. The leader, a massive dragon with black scales and golden eyes, lowered its head and regarded the child with an intensity that sent a shiver down its spine. The child was alive, and for some reason, that was enough. The leader of the dragons spoke, in a language older than time itself, but there were no words. The air vibrated with power, and the sky above seemed to change as if the world itself recognized that something extraordinary had happened. The child, the dragon's voice seemed to echo through the air, though no one spoke. It is not just a failed experiment, it is something more. Something chosen. The other dragons seemed to understand. They lowered their massive wings and bowed their heads in a form of respect. It was as if they were welcoming the child into something larger than anyone could comprehend. The baby, barely a year old, looked up at the dragons, his eyes wide with wonder. He was alone. He had been abandoned. But the dragons did not see him as a mistake. They saw him as something special. And in that moment, the child's life would change forever. The dragons surrounded the baby, their great wings folding protectively around him. A strange warmth began to spread from them, and the baby, who had been so cold and abandoned just moments before, felt something deep inside him stir. It was a feeling of power, something he had never known, something he could not yet understand. But the dragons understood. They had felt it too. As the sun set over the barren planet, the dragons took flight once more, but this time they carried the child with them. The winds howled, and the stars seemed to twinkle brighter as the dragons soared into the sky, their massive forms disappearing into the unknown. The baby, now safe within the protective wings of the dragons, would never be abandoned again. And though the aliens had thrown him away, they had unknowingly chosen the wrong path. The child was not their failure. He was something much greater. In the distance, the alien ship continued its journey, unaware of the true destiny of the child they had abandoned. The dragons had claimed him now, and the universe would soon learn that no one, especially not the ones who had thrown him away, could change the course of fate. The dragons soared through the darkening sky, their massive wings cutting through the clouds like whispers of ancient power. The baby, still cradled in the leader's grasp, felt the wind rush past him, but he was not afraid. In fact, he felt an unusual calmness, as if the dragons had become his protectors, his family. As the dragons flew, the vast landscape of the barren planet stretched below them, an endless stretch of rocky terrain and scorched earth. The silence between them was profound, broken only by the sound of their wings and the distant echoes of a strange humming that seemed to vibrate through the air. The baby, now more alert, looked up at the dragons with wide eyes, his gaze flickering between them. His tiny hands reached out as if trying to grasp the air, to understand the mystery of his new surroundings. But there was something else, something far deeper, that seemed to stir within him. The leader of the dragons, whose scales gleamed like obsidian, glanced down at the child. The child felt his eyes, ancient and knowing, settle upon him. A wave of warmth washed over him, and for a moment he felt as though he could understand the dragon's thoughts. The child is different. The leader's voice seemed to reverberate in the child's mind, not in words but in feeling. He carries the mark of the stars, a connection to a power greater than we have ever known. The other dragons shifted uneasily, their large eyes reflecting a flicker of concern. They had followed their leader for countless eons, but never had they encountered something so mysterious, so uncertain. The child, abandoned and rejected by the alien race, was now in their care, and they knew, deep down, that this moment was pivotal. They flew deeper into the hidden valley, a place even the dragons rarely ventured. The terrain became more rugged, the air thicker with the scent of ancient forests. There in the heart of the valley stood a colossal temple, its ruins nearly swallowed by centuries of creeping vines, but still standing as a testament to a lost civilization. The dragons landed gently on the stone steps of the temple, the ground trembling beneath them. The baby, held carefully in the leader's claws, was lowered onto the cold stone floor. As he touched the ground, an electric jolt of energy coursed through him. It was as if the temple itself recognized him, as though the very air reacted to his presence. The leader of the dragons extended his wings protectively around the child, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. The only sound was the whisper of the wind and the faint hum of an unseen force pulsing through the ruins. The baby's eyes sparkled with the energy that surrounded him, as if he had unlocked something deep within. This place, the dragon leader murmured, lowering his head in reverence. It was built to guard a secret, a power older than time itself, and it has chosen him. The other dragons were silent, their eyes wide with awe and suspicion. This was no ordinary child. He was not merely the product of an alien experiment. He was something more, something that resonated with an ancient magic buried deep beneath the earth. The leader glanced up at the sky, his golden eyes narrowing as though sensing something. "We must move quickly. They are coming." For the first time, the baby's tiny face flickered with confusion. He had no words, no understanding of what was happening, but he felt it. The tension in the air, the undeniable presence of something dark approaching. The dragons, realizing that time was running out, spread their wings once more, ready to protect the child at all costs. The leader's gaze swept across the ruins, his sharp eyes scanning every shadow, every crack in the stone. He could feel the pulse of the ancient magic growing stronger. The temple's heart was awakening, but so too was something else. Something dangerous, the ones who abandoned him. "They will not let go so easily," the leader growled, his voice like the rumble of thunder. "They have sensed his survival, and they will come for him. They always come for what they can control." A sudden noise echoed from the depths of the valley, the sound of heavy footfalls crunching against the earth. The ground trembled once more, and a low growl echoed from the shadows. The dragons tensed, their scales bristling with anticipation. It was as if the planet itself was preparing for a confrontation. The baby stirred in the dragon leader's grasp, his small hands reaching out as if he instinctively understood that something was about to happen. The dragons, sensing his unease, closed in around him. Their wings flared and their eyes glowed brighter, but even they knew that this was no ordinary battle. This was a fight for something far greater. And as the first of the alien soldiers appeared in the distance, stepping out of the shadows like wraiths, the baby let out a single, high-pitched cry, a sound that echoed through the valley like the call of destiny. The aliens, cloaked in dark armor, advanced slowly, their movements deliberate. They had come to finish what they started. They had come to claim the child, to use him for their twisted experiments, to control his power and bend it to their will. But the dragons were not going to let that happen. Not this time. The leader of the dragons stood tall, his wings unfurled like a dark shadow across the valley. "You cannot take him," the leader hissed, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "He is beyond your reach. You have made your mistake, and now you will pay." As the alien soldiers advanced, the dragons unleashed their first roar, a deafening sound that shook the earth itself. The valley seemed to collapse in on itself, as if the very ground was rejecting the invaders. The baby's cry grew louder, as if resonating with the dragon's power, his tiny body glowing with the energy that surrounded him. And as the aliens charged, the dragons spread their wings, unleashing a storm of fire and lightning. The battle had begun, and it would be a fight to the death, but the baby, the child who had been abandoned and forgotten, had become the center of a war that would change the fate of worlds. The dragons fought fiercely, their ancient power rippling through the air. But the aliens were not without their own strength. A brutal battle unfolded, a clash of forces that would decide the child's future. But in the midst of the chaos, one thing was clear. This was not just a fight for survival. This was the beginning of something far greater. Something that could shape the very fabric of the universe. And in the heart of the storm, the child, now more than just an abandoned experiment, began to understand his true power. The dragons had found him, and they would protect him. But the question remained, would he rise to meet the destiny they had set before him, or would the shadows of his past consume him? The battle raged on in the valley, an overwhelming clash of power between the dragons and the alien invaders. The air crackled with energy as the dragons unleashed torrents of fire, their scales shimmering with an otherworldly glow. Each roar sent shockwaves through the planet, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. The alien soldiers, clad in dark armor, fired back with advanced weapons, their energy blasts slicing through the air like lightning. But the dragons were more than a match for them. Above the chaos, the baby, the abandoned child who had once been left to die, lay in the protective claws of the dragon leader, safe from the destruction around him. His eyes, wide with both confusion and awe, followed every movement of the battle. The power in the air was almost overwhelming, and yet somehow he felt a strange connection to it, a deep resonating pull that seemed to speak to him on a level he couldn't understand. The leader of the dragons, a towering creature with scales as dark as the night and eyes that glowed like molten gold, watched the fight with a careful, calculating gaze. His name was Drakkar, and his centuries of wisdom and battle experience had made him the protector of his kind. He had sensed something in the child from the very beginning, something far beyond the power of the aliens or even the dragons themselves. "He is the key," Drakkar muttered, his voice low like the rumble of distant thunder. "This child, he holds the power that even the ancient gods feared." As the battle intensified, the alien forces regrouped, retreating momentarily to reassess their strategy. They had not expected such resistance. Their advanced weaponry, their technology was nothing compared to the raw power of the dragons. But they were not easily deterred. Their goal was clear: capture the child no matter the cost. "The child is not just a failure. He's the key to everything," one of the alien commanders hissed, speaking through a communicator to his superiors. "We cannot let him fall into the hands of the dragons." The commanders knew they were losing the battle, but they also understood something that the dragons did not. The child was no mere human. He was the result of their most dangerous experiment, a being engineered to surpass the boundaries of human potential, but they had never anticipated the dragon's intervention. As the alien forces regrouped, a heavy silence fell over the valley. The dragons, standing guard, looked up to the skies, their senses alert. The very air had shifted. Something was coming. Something far darker than the aliens. Something older, more powerful. "They're not alone," Drakkar murmured, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. "The true enemy is about to reveal itself." The baby lying in Drakkar's claws shifted restlessly. His small fingers twitched, and for a moment his eyes glowed with an intense, unnatural light. The dragon's gaze turned to him, alarmed by the sudden change. "What is happening to him?" one of the younger dragons asked, worry lacing his voice. Drakkar's gaze softened. "He is awakening," he said simply, though there was something in his tone that betrayed a deep sense of concern. "The child is beginning to tap into the power that lies dormant within him." At that moment, the ground beneath them trembled once more. But this time it wasn't just the shockwaves of battle. It was something else, something ancient. From deep within the planet, a dark force stirred. The ruins of the ancient temple began to shake violently, as if the very foundations of the earth were awakening. The baby's eyes burned brighter now, as though he could feel the presence that was rising from below. The dragons began to spread their wings, ready to take flight at a moment's notice. "It's happening," Drakkar whispered, his voice heavy with dread. "The seal is broken." Suddenly, the earth split open beneath the temple, and from the depths of the chasm, a massive, shadowy form rose, a creature unlike anything the dragons had ever encountered. It was not a dragon. It was something far older, far darker. Its body was cloaked in darkness, its wings vast enough to block out the sun. Its eyes burned with the fire of ancient wrath. The creature was known only in whispered legends. The Fallen One, a being of unimaginable power locked away by the gods themselves millennia ago. But now it was free, and it was drawn to the child. The dragons were frozen in shock. They had known the legends, had heard the stories of the Fallen One. They had thought it was nothing more than a myth, a tale to frighten the young dragons. But now, standing before them in the flesh, was the true terror of the universe. And it was coming for the child. "No," Drakkar roared, his voice shaking the very air. "We cannot let him fall into the hands of this creature." The Fallen One's voice echoed through the valley, a deep guttural sound that rattled the bones of the dragons. "I have waited long enough," it hissed. "The child is mine. He will fulfill the prophecy, and with him I will rule the universe." As the creature's wings unfurled, a dark cloud enveloped the valley, blotting out the stars. The ground trembled beneath their feet as if the entire planet was responding to the creature's presence. The dragons immediately took flight, their bodies cutting through the air like lightning, ready to protect the child at all costs. But the Fallen One was powerful, too powerful. It reached out with its shadowy tendrils, grabbing hold of the dragons, pushing them back. The battle was no longer one-sided. The child, now fully awake, began to glow brighter, his energy pulsing like a beacon. The energy from within him resonated with the ancient power of the Fallen One. But instead of collapsing under its influence, he seemed to grow stronger. The dragons watched in awe, unsure of what was happening. "He is fighting it," Drakkar said, his voice thick with disbelief. The child is fighting the fallen one's influence, but how? How could this small child, abandoned and forgotten, hold so much power? Was he truly the key to something far greater than anyone had realized? As the battle raged on, the baby's power began to awaken further, and the air grew thick with tension. The fallen one, sensing the power within the child, let out a deafening roar, and with one last push of its dark magic, it sought to claim him. The valley trembled as the two forces collided, darkness and light, each vying for control of the child. But the child wasn't just a passive being anymore. He was more than what anyone had imagined. And in that moment, the baby opened his mouth and cried out, not a cry of fear, but a cry of raw power, a cry that resonated across the stars. The battle was far from over, but the true test had begun. The battle between the dragons and the fallen one continued to rage in the valley, but the tides of war had shifted. For the first time, the dragon saw the true power of the child they had been entrusted with. His cries, once weak and innocent, now echoed with an ancient force, an energy that defied everything they knew about the universe. But the fallen one's presence was like an insidious shadow, clouding the skies, blocking the sun. It lashed out with its dark tendrils, attempting to consume the child's light. The dragons, who had once been the rulers of the skies, found themselves struggling against a force far older than their kind. Every time they attacked, the fallen one countered, its power growing stronger by the moment. "We cannot defeat it directly," Drakkar, the leader of the dragons, said as his massive wings beat against the heavy, oppressive air. He had grown weary, his scales singed from the dark energies that surrounded them. "The child is the key, but we need to protect him from the darkness that seeks to claim him." One of the younger dragons, a fiery red creature with bright amber eyes, called out to Drakkar, "How do we protect him when the very world seems to bend under the weight of the fallen one's power?" Drakkar lowered his head, his golden eyes reflecting a deep concern. "We must take him to the Temple of Ages. The Temple of Ages, an ancient structure hidden in the deepest, most sacred mountain ranges. It was a place that no one dared enter, even dragons. Legend spoke of a power within the temple so vast that it could either save the world or destroy it. Drakkar had never ventured there himself, but the time had come for the child to be taken there. It was the only place where the fallen one could be held at bay, where the child could begin his true training. But it would not be easy. The dragons, knowing the dangers that lay ahead, gathered around the baby and took flight once more. The air grew thick with tension as they soared above the burning valley. The wind howled, and the skies above them darkened as the shadow of the fallen one loomed in pursuit. It was as though the creature could sense their movements, following them with a relentless, predatory gaze. As they flew, the baby, no longer a mere child but a vessel of untapped power, felt the stirring of something within him. The child's tiny hands glowed faintly and a strange warmth filled his chest. He wasn't sure what was happening, but there was a new connection between him and the world around him. He could feel the energy in the air, the pulse of the earth beneath him, and the ancient power that the dragons guarded. After what seemed like hours of flight, they arrived at the Temple of Ages, a place so ancient that the air itself felt alive. It stood on a high plateau, its tall, spiraling towers made of stone so old that it seemed the very rocks had memories of a forgotten time. The temple was surrounded by a dense forest, the trees twisted and gnarled, their bark blackened by centuries of exposure to the elements. The dragons landed gently in the temple's courtyard, their massive forms casting long shadows over the stone floor. The baby, now awake and alert, was placed at the entrance of the temple. The moment his feet touched the ground, an electric jolt surged through him. He could feel the immense power that radiated from the temple itself, a power so pure and ancient that it resonated with something deep within him. "The trials begin now," Drakkar's voice echoed in the silence. "This is where you will learn who you truly are." The dragons stepped back, their wings folding protectively around the baby as the Temple of Ages loomed before them. "You must enter alone," Drakkar continued, his voice steady but filled with a hidden sorrow. "Only the chosen one can enter the heart of the temple. You must face your destiny." The baby, now no longer just a mere infant but a symbol of something greater, took his first hesitant step into the temple. As he crossed the threshold, the door behind him slammed shut with an otherworldly force. The dragons, who had once protected him with all their might, could do nothing now. The trials within the temple were his alone to face. Inside, the temple was dark and silent, except for the sound of the baby's breath. Strange glowing symbols etched into the walls flickered and pulsed, lighting the path ahead. Each symbol seemed to whisper in an ancient tongue, a language that the baby could not understand. But somehow he felt the meaning. He wasn't sure how or why, but it was as if the temple itself was speaking to him. As he ventured deeper, a strange warmth began to rise within him. It wasn't just the energy of the temple, it was something else. The energy in his chest swelled, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. His small hands glowed brighter with every step he took, as though he were drawing power from the very walls of the temple. Suddenly, a deep voice echoed throughout the hall, so loud it shook the stones beneath his feet. "Who dares enter the Temple of Ages?" The voice was ancient, deep, and full of wisdom, and yet there was an undeniable sense of danger within it. The baby, standing still in the center of the hall, felt the air grow heavier. His small body trembled as the power within him surged once again, but this time it was different. This power was not from the dragons. This power was his. The walls of the temple began to shift, revealing a grand chamber at the heart of the temple. Inside, a massive statue of a dragon stood tall, its eyes glowing with the same golden light as Drakar's. As the baby approached the statue, the voice spoke again. "You seek power," the voice said. "But power alone cannot save you. You must choose." Suddenly, two paths appeared before the baby. One path led to a glowing orb that floated above an altar. The other path led to an ancient door, its surface etched with more symbols. The child felt an irresistible pull toward the glowing orb, its light calling to him like a beacon. But as his tiny hands reached toward it, he felt something stir deep within him. A voice, soft but urgent, whispered to him from within. "Not the orb," it said. "The door. The key lies within." The baby hesitated for a moment, torn between the two paths, but then, as if guided by an unseen force, he turned toward the ancient door. As his hand touched the door's surface, the stone seemed to melt away, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. Inside, a swirling vortex of energy awaited him, its center glowing with the power of the universe itself. "This is your trial," the voice said one last time. "Embrace your true power, or let the darkness consume you." With a deep breath, the child stepped forward, the swirling energy enveloping him. As the vortex consumed him, his body flared with light, his power growing beyond what even the dragons could comprehend. But what awaited him on the other side of this trial? The very core of his being would be tested. Would he emerge as the savior of worlds, or would he be swallowed whole by the darkness that had once sought to claim him? The chamber of the Temple of Ages was alive with energy as the child stood at its center, surrounded by the swirling vortex. His body pulsed with light, drawing on an ancient power that seemed to flow through every cell of his being. The darkness of the fallen one felt distant now, its menacing presence almost drowned out by the raw energy surging within him. But he was not yet free. He had not yet fully embraced what lay within him. The swirling vortex with its cosmic energies beckoned him to understand the depths of his own power. But as he stepped deeper into the heart of it, the space around him shifted, becoming something else entirely. No longer was he surrounded by the temple's stone walls. Now he was standing on a barren, desolate battlefield. Familiar faces surrounded him, the alien invaders, the very beings who had discarded him as nothing more than an experiment. He saw them clearly now, their dark armor gleaming in the distant light, their weapons ready to strike. But this time, they weren't just enemies. They were the architects of his pain, the ones who had cast him aside, leaving him to die on a barren world. "You will pay," a voice hissed in the distance, the voice of the alien commander who had given the order to abandon him. The child's heart beat faster as the memory of his abandonment surged through him. "You were nothing, a failure. You still are nothing." The child's small hands clenched into fists as the anger swelled within him. He had been cast aside, discarded like a broken tool. He had been left alone to die, helpless and vulnerable. But no longer. He had been chosen by the dragons, awakened by the Temple of Ages. He had power, more power than they could ever comprehend. Suddenly, the air around him thickened, crackling with an energy that felt both alien and familiar. The voice of the fallen one rumbled from the shadows, its presence looming over him. "The child has awakened," the voice whispered, its tone as cold and dark as the abyss. He cannot escape his fate. He was born to be my weapon. The ground beneath the child's feet trembled as the familiar dark shape of the fallen one materialized before him. Its monstrous form stretched impossibly tall, its wings folding around it like the very fabric of the universe bending in on itself. Its eyes were pools of swirling darkness, and every inch of its presence radiated pure malevolence. "You cannot defeat me," the fallen one growled, its voice vibrating through the air. "You are nothing but a child, a broken creation. You will bow to me just as the others did." The child, despite the overwhelming presence of the fallen one, stood tall. He felt the heat of his anger rise within him. But there was something else, something more than just revenge. There was a sense of destiny, a power that was beyond anything the fallen one had ever encountered. The child clenched his fists again, and this time, the light in his hands flared brighter, burning with an intensity that seemed to shake the very air around him. "You cannot control me," the child said, his voice calm but laced with a strength that echoed through the valley. "I am not your weapon. I am not your failure." The fallen one paused, its massive head tilting as if it was considering the child's words. Then a dark smile spread across its face. "So be it," it sneered. "You are more than a mere weapon, but you will still bow to me, for I am the darkness that consumes all." With a growl, the fallen one extended its long, shadowy tendrils, reaching for the child. The ground around them cracked and shifted as the air filled with the echoes of its power. But as the tendrils neared him, the child thrust his hands forward, and a burst of light erupted from him, so bright and intense that it momentarily blinded the fallen one. The dark creature recoiled, but it was too late. The child's energy surged forward, and with a single motion he ripped the tendrils from the air, disintegrating them with the raw force of his power. The fallen one's eyes flashed with a new kind of rage. "This is impossible," it growled. "You should have been mine." But the child, no longer a helpless baby but a being of untold power, had no intention of allowing the fallen one to claim him. He had faced the darkness and rejected it. He had survived. And now, he would make the fallen one pay for what it had done to him. The temple's ground cracked open beneath him, and a massive burst of energy erupted from the child's chest, sending a wave of light that knocked the fallen one back. The fallen one staggered, momentarily disoriented, but as it recovered, it charged again, its dark power crackling through the air. The child stood firm, his fists glowing with light as the energy within him swelled. He wasn't just fighting for himself now. He was fighting for everything the aliens had tried to take from him: his freedom, his destiny, and the very essence of who he was. Suddenly, the dragons arrived, their massive wings cutting through the air as they descended upon the battlefield. The fallen one turned, its eyes narrowing with fury. The dragons, powerful and proud, were here to protect the child, to help him fight back the darkness. Drakkar, the dragon leader, landed beside the child, his wings flaring out like an impenetrable shield. "You cannot have him," Drakkar said, his voice low and filled with the promise of retribution. "He is ours to protect, and we will see that he fulfills his destiny." The fallen one bellowed in rage, its form twisting and shifting as it prepared for a final devastating attack. But the child, filled with the power of the Temple of Ages and the dragons, knew what had to be done. He raised his hands to the sky, and a beam of pure light shot from his body, illuminating the entire valley. The fallen one howled in pain as the light pierced through its dark form. For the first time in its existence, the fallen one felt fear. The darkness that had once consumed everything now shrank back in the face of the child's power. The light continued to burn, relentless and pure, until finally, the fallen one shrieked in agony and began to dissolve into nothingness. With a final, deafening roar, the fallen one collapsed, its form fading into the wind like smoke. The child stood victorious, his chest heaving with the weight of the battle he had just fought. The dragons, too, stood tall beside him, their wings still spread wide as they watched the remnants of the darkness disappear into the night. Drakkar turned to the child, his golden eyes filled with pride and awe. "You have done it," he said softly. "You have defeated the darkness and claimed your place as our protector." The child, no longer a mere human but something far more, looked up at the stars. The battle was won, but the journey was far from over. There were still many battles to fight and many enemies to face. But for now, the darkness was gone, and the child, the one who had been abandoned and discarded, had risen to become the savior of worlds. The aftermath of the battle was nothing short of catastrophic. The valley, once teeming with energy, now lay in ruins. The air still crackled with the remnants of the intense power that had been unleashed. The dragons stood in their majestic form, their wings outstretched as they surveyed the destruction around them. But amid the wreckage there was one undeniable truth. The child, once abandoned and discarded, had risen to a power that even the gods could not foresee. The child stood at the center of the battlefield, his small hands glowing faintly with the energy he had just unleashed. He was exhausted, his body trembling with the aftermath of his power. But his eyes were filled with a quiet intensity, as if he had crossed a threshold that even he had never anticipated. "You have defeated the Fallen One," Drakkar said, his voice filled with awe. "You have done what no one thought possible. But there is more to this story. There are others, more powerful than the Fallen One, who seek to claim the power you now possess." The words sent a chill through the dragons, as though they too realized that the child's true destiny was far from over. Despite his victory, there was a feeling of impending doom hanging in the air, a sense that the world was not yet finished with him. The child turned to Drakkar, his golden eyes now sharper, more focused. "Who were these others?" he asked quietly. His voice, though soft, carried the weight of someone who had been through trials beyond his years. "The Titans," Drakkar replied gravely. "Beings older than the dragons, older than the stars themselves. They are the true rulers of the universe, and they see your power as a threat. They are the ones who cast the Fallen One into the depths, and now they seek to control the source of that power. You." The child's fists clenched. The anger that had fueled him before, in the face of his abandonment and the brutality of the aliens, now turned to a simmering rage at the thought of yet another enemy, even more dangerous than the Fallen One. The Titans were not just another threat, they were a force of nature, unyielding and all-consuming. Drakkar's eyes softened as he regarded the child, understanding the confusion and anger that clouded his thoughts. "You are the key, child," Drakkar continued. "The Titans believe that your power will unlock a new era for the universe, a reign of darkness and chaos. But they do not understand what you have already learned. You have control over this power. You will not let them claim it." Suddenly the ground began to shake once more, far more violently than before. The dragons instinctively raised their heads, their bodies tense as the earth beneath them cracked. A low rumble echoed through the valley, the sound growing louder until it seemed to vibrate through their bones. "They're coming," Drakkar muttered. "The Titans. They are here." Before the dragons could react, the sky above them split open with a deafening roar. Massive, shadowy forms descended from the heavens, their outlines barely visible against the swirling clouds. Each figure was colossal, their forms dark and foreboding, their eyes glowing with a cold, ancient power. The Titans. There were 3 of them, their wings black as night, their faces obscured by helmets that shimmered with an eerie glow. They landed with a force so powerful that the ground trembled beneath their weight. Each Titan stood taller than even the dragons, their silhouettes casting long, ominous shadows over the valley. The air around them crackled with raw power, and the very atmosphere seemed to bend in their presence. The dragons bristled, but they did not move. Drakkar stood firm, his wings raised protectively around the child. "You have come for him," Drakkar said, his voice a low growl. "But you will not take him." The Titan in the center, the tallest and most imposing of them all, stepped forward. His voice echoed through the valley like thunder. "The child belongs to us now. The power he wields is beyond the comprehension of even your kind. You have played your part, dragons, but your time has passed. He is ours to control." The child, standing silently behind Drakkar, felt the weight of their gaze. The Titans were not merely powerful, they were ancient, their very presence an unspoken threat. They were the true rulers of the universe, the ones who had shaped the stars and the worlds, and now they had come for him. "I will not bow to you," the child said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. His body flared with energy once again, his hands glowing brighter as the power within him stirred. "I am not your pawn. I will not be controlled." The Titans looked at him with disdain, their glowing eyes narrowing as they assessed his defiance. The Titan in the center raised a hand, his fingers crackling with dark energy. "You do not understand, child," he said. "You have no choice. You are a weapon, a creation, and creations must be controlled. But before the Titan could strike, the child raised his hands, and with a sudden surge of energy, a beam of pure light shot from his chest, crashing into the Titan's outstretched hand. The light burned with such intensity that the Titan staggered back, his armor sizzling and crackling under the power. For a moment, there was silence. The child's energy pulsed in the air, resonating with the ancient force that flowed through the valley. The dragons watched, their eyes wide with awe as the child stood before the Titans, his power of force they had never witnessed before. "You are not a weapon," the child said, his voice steady, unyielding. "You are not my masters. I am my own. I will never be controlled again." The Titans recoiled, their faces hidden behind their dark helmets, but their presence loomed larger than ever. The battle was not just for the child's survival. It was for his very soul. Drakkar and the other dragons stepped forward, their wings flaring, ready to protect the child at all costs. But the Titans were not so easily deterred. The Titan at the center raised his hand and a surge of dark energy shot through the air, enveloping the dragons and the child in a vortex of shadow. "We will see if your power is enough," the Titan said, his voice a cold promise. The child stood, his body crackling with light, his energy building like a storm waiting to break. "It will be," he said, his voice unwavering. "I will protect this world. I will protect myself, and you will not take it from me." As the Titans closed in, the child's light grew brighter, filling the valley with a radiance so intense that it seemed to push the very shadows back. The dragons roared, joining him in a powerful unified stance. The fate of the universe hung in the balance as the final confrontation began. The battle between light and darkness had begun. The Titans had come for the child, but they had underestimated his power and the power of those who had come to protect him. Would the child rise to the challenge and defeat the ancient beings that sought to control him? Or would the universe fall to the darkness they brought with them? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. The child had already become something greater than anyone had ever imagined. And the battle for his destiny was only just beginning. The sky above the valley was split in two. On one side, an impenetrable blackness swirled with cosmic energy, while on the other, the brilliant light from the child's body fought against the encroaching darkness, pushing it back with every beat of his heart. The Titans towering over him summoned waves of shadow and flame, their immense powers darkening the skies. The child stood at the center of this cosmic battle, his small figure glowing with the intensity of 1,000 suns. The dragons, fierce and unwavering, formed a protective circle around him, their wings spread wide, ready to defend the child at all costs. "You cannot win," the Titan leader growled, his voice cold and eternal. "You are nothing but a flicker in the darkness, a blip in the grand tapestry of the universe. You have no understanding of the power you face." The child's golden eyes locked onto the Titan, his small hands crackling with energy. "I am the power," he said, his voice steady, his resolve stronger than ever before. "I was cast aside, left to die, but now, I choose my own destiny." The Titans recoiled slightly, their confidence shaking for the first time. They had expected this child to be a mere tool, a weapon to be wielded at their will, but they had underestimated the strength of a being who had known nothing but survival. They had misjudged him, and now they would pay the price. The battle intensifies, the air around them grew thick with power. The child raised his arms, his body surging with light so brilliant that it lit up the entire valley, casting the shadows of the Titans in stark contrast. A pulse of energy rippled outward from him, expanding like a wave of pure force. The ground beneath them cracked, the very earth shifting as though the planet itself was alive, reacting to the child's call. The dragons, too, felt the power stirring inside them. They had protected him for so long, but now it was clear. The child was no longer just a fragile being they had taken under their wing. He was a force in his own right, and the Titans were not ready for what was about to unfold. "It is time," Drakkar said, his voice filled with awe. "The child is awakening, fully now. The power that lies within him is the same force that shaped the stars. We are no longer protecting him. We are standing beside him, in this fight for the future. The Titans turned their gaze back to the child, their eyes burning with hatred. "You think you can control the power of the cosmos?" the Titan leader sneered. "You are but a mortal, a creation of this universe, not its master." But the child's response was not words. Instead, he thrust his hands forward, and the very heavens trembled. A surge of light erupted from him like a tidal wave, crashing into the Titans with the force of an entire galaxy colliding. The first Titan was thrown back, its armor cracking under the weight of the energy, and the second staggered, its feet digging into the ground to hold its position. The third Titan, the largest and most menacing, advanced, its hands outstretched to strike. But as it reached for the child, the light surrounding him intensified, creating a protective shield so bright it blinded the Titan. For the first time, the Titan faltered, unsure of how to proceed. The child was no longer a victim of fate. He had become the harbinger of his own destiny. "You will not control me." The child's power surged again, growing exponentially with each moment, each pulse of light. He no longer seemed like a mere boy. He was the embodiment of the universe itself. His form shimmered with the energy of the stars, his eyes glowing with the power of ancient beings who had shaped the galaxy long before the Titans existed. "You will not control me," the child said, his voice ringing with the authority of a god. "I choose the path of freedom. I choose to create my own legacy." The Titans, now visibly shaken, turned to face each other, a silent agreement passing between them. They knew that if they were to defeat the child, they would have to work together, unite their strength in a way they never had before. But even as they prepared for their final assault, the child was already one step ahead. The child's body burned with energy, his hands raised to the sky. The valley below quaked with the intensity of his power as he summoned the full force of the Temple of Ages, the ancient magic of the dragons, and the very stars themselves into a single, all-encompassing force. The ground beneath them cracked open, and from the depths of the earth, columns of light erupted, swirling around the child like a cyclone of pure energy. The dragons took flight, their wings cutting through the air, rallying around the child. They too channeled their ancient power, their connection to the land, and their bond with the child to strengthen his resolve. With a deafening roar, the Titans launched their final attack, a wave of shadow and destruction that sought to obliterate everything in its path. The child, undeterred, slammed his hands to the ground, and the light from within him surged upward, meeting the darkness in a cataclysmic explosion. For a moment, the valley was consumed by the collision of forces, light against darkness, energy against entropy. The sky above split open, the heavens themselves seeming to tear apart as the battle reached its zenith. The child's triumph, then, as if the universe itself held its breath, the light finally overtook the darkness. The Titans' power began to crack, their forms flickering and faltering under the weight of the child's unrelenting energy. The first Titan fell to its knees, its form disintegrating as the light consumed it. The second Titan tried to retreat, but the child's energy reached out, pulling it back into the storm of power. And finally, the third Titan, the largest and most fearsome, let out a final scream as the light enveloped it, reducing it to nothingness. The silence that followed was deafening. The valley, once racked with chaos, was now still. The only sound that remained was the slow, steady breathing of the child, his chest rising and falling as the power within him began to ebb. The dragons, hovering in the air around him, slowly descended to the ground, their wings folding as they landed. Drakkar, his eyes filled with admiration and respect, stepped forward and placed a clawed hand on the child's shoulder. "You have done it," Drakkar said, his voice reverberating with pride. "You have not only defeated the Titans, you have forged your own destiny. The power that was meant to enslave you is now yours to command." The child, still glowing with the light of the battle, looked around at the valley, the ruins, the silence, the peace that had been won. He had faced the darkness, had confronted the very beings who had sought to control him, and emerged victorious. But there was still a weight to his heart, a lingering question. "What now?" the child asked, his voice soft but filled with the weight of everything that had happened. Drakkar smiled. "Now you become what you were always meant to be. You are not just a child. You are a force of nature, a guardian of worlds, and your legacy will live on for as long as the stars burn bright." The child stood tall, his hand still glowing with the power of the Temple of Ages and the dragons. He had overcome the impossible. He had chosen his own path, and now as the light of his victory shone brightly over the valley, he knew that the future was his to shape. The final battle had been won. The Titans were no more, their reign of terror shattered, and the child, once a discarded experiment, had emerged as the hero of the universe, a symbol of resilience, of the power to choose one's own destiny. But this was not the end. It was just the beginning. The child's legacy had been written in the stars, and now it would shine for all to see.